Imagine two people locked in a room. They fundamentally disagree on almost everything: how the room should be decorated, who gets to sit in the most comfortable chair, and who controls the thermostat. But there is a catch. If either of them throws a punch, the entire room explodes. That is exactly what the recent high-stakes meeting between the United States and China felt like. Today, we are opening up the dossier. We are going to treat this like a raw intelligence report. What were the actual, unvarnished goals of this summit? And when the doors finally opened and the cameras started flashing, did anyone actually get what they wanted?
That exploding room metaphor is painfully accurate. When we look at the geopolitical landscape right now, we are not just looking at a traditional rivalry. We are looking at two deeply intertwined superpowers trying to figure out how to compete aggressively without accidentally triggering a catastrophic global conflict. The tension leading up to this meeting was palpable. You had economic decoupling on one side, military posturing on the other, and a global economy holding its collective breath. So, treating this as an intelligence debrief is really the only way to cut through the diplomatic fluff. We have to look at the hard deliverables.
Exactly. We need to strip away the handshake photos and the carefully worded press releases. Let us start with the baseline objectives. If we are looking at the pre-meeting briefing folders for both sides, what were the primary goals the United States brought to the table?
For the US, the absolute top priority was establishing guardrails. The administration went into this knowing they were not going to solve the Taiwan issue, and they knew they were not going to magically fix the trade war. The primary goal was crisis management. Specifically, the US wanted to restore military-to-military communications. For months, if a US ship and a Chinese vessel got too close in the South China Sea, there was no direct hotline to de-escalate. That is terrifying from a strategic standpoint. The second US goal was to solidify boundaries around advanced technology, specifically semiconductors and artificial intelligence, without making it look like an outright economic blockade. They call it a small yard, high fence strategy. Protect the highly sensitive tech, but keep the broader trade flowing.
It is fascinating because it sounds less like striving for peace and more like negotiating the terms of engagement for an ongoing conflict. We are going to keep competing, but let us agree not to accidentally start World War III over a radar glitch. What about the other side of the table? What was the primary objective for China?
China's goals were heavily driven by domestic economic realities. Their post-pandemic economic recovery has been sluggish. Youth unemployment is high, the real estate sector is incredibly fragile, and foreign investment has been cooling off. So, their primary goal was optics and stabilization. They needed to project strength globally, showing that they sit at the table as an absolute equal to the US, while simultaneously projecting stability to foreign investors. They wanted to ease the aggressive export controls the US has placed on technology and secure a breathing space to stabilize their economy. Essentially, they wanted to hit the pause button on the rapid deterioration of the relationship.
So, we have the US wanting military guardrails and tech containment, and China wanting economic breathing room and global respect. That is the setup. Now, let us grade the execution. Looking at the post-summit intelligence, did they actually achieve these goals? Let us start with the military hotline. Did the US get its guardrails?
Yes, and this is probably the most significant deliverable of the entire summit. The agreement to resume direct military-to-military communication is a massive win for global security. It is a tangible achievement. If a miscalculation happens over the Taiwan Strait tomorrow, a US general can actually pick up the phone and speak to a Chinese counterpart. It pulls both sides back from the brink of accidental escalation. In the intelligence community, we call that a high-value risk mitigation.
I have to say, it is a little grim that simply agreeing to pick up the phone is considered a massive diplomatic victory. But, given the current climate, I suppose we have to take what we can get. What about the economic and technological goals? Did China get the breathing room it desperately wanted?
That is where the scorecard gets a lot more complicated. On the tech and economic front, I would classify the meeting as a stalemate. The US did not back down on its semiconductor export controls. The high fence around that small yard of advanced technology remains firmly in place, which is a major frustration for Beijing. On the flip side, the US did not secure any sweeping concessions from China regarding state-sponsored subsidies or intellectual property practices. Both sides basically agreed to keep talking, which is diplomatic code for "we still disagree completely, but we will do it politely."
It really highlights how complex these strategic intricacies are. You cannot just separate the militar posturing from the economic realities. They feed directly into each other. And honestly, trying to unpack all these layers from the high-level military operations to the subtle cultural shifts happening in the background requires a lot of dedicated focus. Which actually brings us perfectly to something we want to share with our listeners today.
Absolutely. Navigating the modern world means understanding a massive web of interconnected topics, and that is exactly what our sponsor today is designed to help you do.
We want to introduce you to a fantastic podcast called The New Sentinel. If you enjoy the kind of deep dives we are doing right now, you are going to want to add this to your playlist immediately. The New Sentinel is dedicated to providing incredibly thorough discussions on a wildly diverse array of topics.
What I find so compelling about their approach is the sheer range. One episode might feature a rigorous, detailed analysis of strategic military operations, very much like the geopolitical chess match we are discussing today, and the next episode might pivot to the glitz, glamour, and underlying cultural impact of pop culture. They do not just skim the surface. They bring in expert interviews. They utilize fantastic storytelling, and they break down complex subject matter so that you walk away with a comprehensive understanding of the topic.
Exactly. It is rare to find a show that can seamlessly transition from global security architecture to pop culture phenomena without missing a beat. Whether you are a hardcore policy wonk, a military history buff, or just a pop culture enthusiast who loves a well-told story, they have something for you. So, if you want to stay informed, stay entertained, and really broaden your understanding of the world, go check out The New Sentinel wherever you get your podcasts.
Highly recommended. It is exactly the kind of media diet we need more of right now.
Coming back to our intelligence report on the summit, there is a philosophical layer to all this that I cannot stop thinking about. We are talking about guardrails, tariffs, and hotlines. But beneath all the policy, there is a fundamental human cost to this rivalry. When two superpowers engage in this kind of prolonged friction, it fractures global supply chains. It forces smaller nations to choose sides, and it creates a persistent anxiety about the future. Are we just watching the Thucydides trap play out in real time?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? The Thucydides trap being the historical theory that when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power, conflict is almost inevitable. I think the intelligence takeaway from this specific meeting is that both sides are acutely aware of that trap, and both are actively trying to tiptoe around it. But the underlying friction has not disappeared. The tectonic plates are still grinding against each other. The US and China have fundamentally different visions for the future of global governance, the internet, human rights, and economic frameworks. A single meeting was never going to reconcile those deeply rooted philosophical differences.
It is like putting a tiny bandage on a geological fault line. You might cover up the crack for a moment, but you cannot stop the earthquake if the pressure keeps building. The introduction of artificial intelligence and quantum computing into this rivalry makes it even more unpredictable. During the Cold War, the metric for power was nuclear warheads. It was tangible. You could count them. Today, the metric for power is algorithms, data dominance, and supply chain leverage. It is invisible, which makes it infinitely harder to regulate.
That is a brilliant point. How do you verify an arms control treaty for artificial intelligence? You cannot. And that was the unspoken ghost haunting this entire summit. The agreements they made, the hotlines, the fentanyl task forces, the climate pledges, these are all analog solutions to an increasingly digital and asymmetrical rivalry. The intelligence assessment is that this meeting successfully lowered the immediate temperature in the room. It bought both sides time. But it did not alter the fundamental trajectory of the relationship. The systemic competition is entirely intact.
So, if we are finalizing this intelligence brief, the executive summary reads something like this. The summit was a tactical success, but a strategic placeholder. The U.S. got its military hotline. China got a moment of stabilized optics. But the core engines of the conflict, technology, trade, and regional dominance are still running at full speed.
That is exactly right. They successfully agreed on how to manage the rivalry, but they did not resolve it. The glass chessboard is still sitting in the middle of the room. They just promised not to flip the table today. But looking forward, the true test will not be what they agreed to in the meeting room. The true test will be how they react the next time an unexpected crisis erupts. Will they actually use that newly established hotline, or will the domestic pressure to look tough override the diplomatic agreements they just signed?
That is the terrifying unknown. We have built the guardrails, but we do not yet know if they can actually withstand the weight of a real crisis. The temperature may have dropped for now, but the climate of competition is permanent. We will be watching very closely to see who makes the next move on the board.